It all started when I noticed something strange happening on my property. A well-worn dirt path cutting right through my land. Tire tracks deeply embedded in the soil, like a scar that refused to heal. For years, I had ignored it, assuming it was just a random shortcut that the occasional driver used to save time. But when I finally decided to put an end to it, I found out that this shortcut wasn't random at all. It was an unspoken, unauthorized public road for my entitled HOA neighbors. The person spearheading this misuse, none other than Karen, the HOA's self-proclaimed queen who strutted around the neighborhood as if she owned every square inch of it. This wasn't just a casual pathway for a few people. It had practically become a main road, and the worst part was that nobody had ever asked for my permission. When I brought it up to my neighbors, they had the audacity to act like I was the bad guy for wanting to reclaim my own property. "We've always used it," one of them huffed, crossing their arms like a petulant child. "This is how we get to the park, the school, the shopping center. It's a community access point." Community access? My land wasn't some public highway, and I wasn't about to let them keep trampling over it like they had some God-given right. So, I did what any reasonable property owner would do. I put up a gate. Nothing fancy, just a simple chain and a private property. No trespassing sign to make it clear that my land wasn't a free-for-all. That's when all hell broke loose. Within an hour, Karen was at my doorstep, her face flushed with a mix of rage and entitlement. She didn't knock, she pounded, her manicured fist slamming against my door so hard that I half expected it to crack. The moment I opened it, she launched into a tirade. "You can't do this," she screeched, pointing at the gate as if it were a personal attack against her. "This is a public road, and you have no right to block it." I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe, unimpressed. "Actually, Karen, it's my land," I said calmly, "and I have every right to decide who drives on it." Her face twisted in fury. "No, you don't. This road has been here for years, and you can't just cut off access like some kind of dictator." "Karen," I sighed, "just because you've been trespassing for years doesn't mean you have a legal right to my land." That only made her more livid. "I'll have you know that the HOA has approved this road," she declared, flipping her perfectly highlighted hair over her shoulder as if that ended the conversation. I had to suppress a laugh. "The HOA doesn't own my property, Karen. I do." That was the moment I saw the storm brewing in her eyes, her lips pressing into a thin, furious line. "Oh, you are going to regret this," she spat. "You'll see. You can't fight the HOA." With that, she spun on her heel and stomped away, heels clicking angrily against the pavement as she stormed off to rally her minions. I sighed, knowing this wasn't over. I had no idea just how far she was willing to go, but I was about to find out. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of loud voices outside my property, groggy and still half asleep. I pulled back the curtains and saw what looked like a full-blown HOA protest forming in front of my newly installed metal gate. Karen was, of course, at the center of it all, her arms crossed like some self-appointed ruler of the land. A handful of neighbors stood behind her, muttering in agreement, while a few others lingered at a distance, watching the scene unfold like it was a reality TV show. I sighed, rubbing my temples before heading outside. The moment I stepped onto my porch, Karen's sharp voice rang out, loud enough to ensure that the entire neighborhood could hear. "This is illegal, and it is an outrage," she bellowed, dramatically waving her arms at the gate like it was a monument to oppression. "This community depends on this road, and you cannot block it off like this." I crossed my arms and leaned against the porch railing, unimpressed. "Karen, we've already been through this. This is my property. You and the HOA have zero authority over it." Karen scoffed. "That's what you think. But the HOA has rules. You can't just wake up one day and decide to cut off access to a road people have been using for years." I raised an eyebrow. "Except I can because, once again, it's not a road. It's my land." One of the HOA members, a man named Greg, stepped forward. "Listen," he said, in what I assumed was supposed to be a calm and rational voice. We understand that technically this is your property, but the community has been using this road for years. If you just work with us." I cut him off. "You mean if I just give up my property for your convenience?" Greg's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but before he could respond, Karen stepped in again. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, her fake diplomacy long gone. "The HOA has approved this road for public use. That means you can't just put up a gate and block it off like some kind of tyrant." I let out a short laugh. "The HOA doesn't own my land, Karen. I do, and I have city records and property deeds to prove it. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the law." Her face twisted with rage. "Oh, don't worry. I already have." And that's when she pulled out her phone and, right in front of me, dialed 911. I stared at her in disbelief, half expecting her to stop at the last second and admit she was bluffing. But no, she actually called the police over this. "My name is Karen Smith," she said in a clipped tone, pacing back and forth like she was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. "I need officers to respond immediately. We have an aggressive man blocking a public road and refusing to comply with HOA regulations. This is a serious safety hazard, and he is harassing the entire neighborhood." I blinked. Did she just call the police on me for standing on my own property? The sheer audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. Some of the other HOA members looked a little uncomfortable, shifting on their feet and exchanging wary glances, but none of them spoke up. Karen, meanwhile, was still on the phone, rambling about how my gate was a threat to public safety and how the police needed to get here immediately before things get out of hand. She even threw in a few exaggerated gasps like she was in some kind of hostage situation. I sighed and shook my head, muttering under my breath, "Unbelievable." About 15 minutes later, 2 squad cars pulled up. 2 officers, one male and one female, stepped out and approached us. I could already see the skepticism on their faces. They had clearly been briefed on the situation, but weren't exactly rushing in like this was an emergency. Karen, however, launched into full-on victim mode. "Officers, thank God you're here," she practically wailed, clutching her chest like she was about to faint. "This man," she spun around and pointed an accusatory finger at me, "has been harassing the community by blocking off this vital road. He's violating HOA rules, refusing to cooperate, and putting everyone at risk." The officers exchanged a look before turning to me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "Of course. This is my property. I own the land, and for years, people have been trespassing on it, treating it as a public road. I put up a gate to stop it because, well, I gestured toward the locked entrance. It's private property." The male officer frowned. "Do you have any documents proving ownership?" I was ready. I had anticipated something like this might happen, so I pulled out a neatly prepared folder from inside my house and handed it to them. Inside were copies of my property deed, survey maps, and even a letter from the city confirming that this land had never been designated as a public road. The female officer flipped through the documents, nodding slightly. "Everything looks in order," she said, turning back to Karen. "Ma'am, this is clearly his property. He has the legal right to block access." Karen's face went pale. No, no, no. That can't be right," she sputtered. "The HOA approved this road for public use. That means it's legally binding." The male officer shook his head. "Ma'am, the HOA has no jurisdiction over private property. They can't turn someone's land into a public road without legal approval from the city and the actual owner." Karen's mouth opened and closed in complete disbelief, but the officers weren't done. Furthermore, the female officer added, "You made a false emergency call claiming harassment and a public safety threat. That's a serious misuse of 911 services." Karen's eyes bulged. But, do you want to explain how exactly this man is harassing you?" the officer pressed. "Because from what I'm seeing, you're the one trespassing and causing a disturbance." At that moment, Karen's bravado crumbled. The realization hit her all at once. She had lost. Not only had the police sided with me, but she had also made herself look like a complete fool in front of half the neighborhood. One of the other HOA members coughed awkwardly and took a few steps back, clearly wanting to distance themselves from her. The male officer turned to me. "Sir, do you want to press charges for trespassing or harassment?" I considered it for a second, but ultimately shook my head. "Not today. I just want her and the HOA to stay off my property." The officer nodded. "Understood. Ma'am, if you or any HOA members attempt to trespass again, this man has every right to press charges. I suggest you respect his property rights." Karen's face had turned a sickly shade of red. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed away, muttering under her breath. The remaining HOA members awkwardly dispersed, trying to pretend they had nothing to do with the whole thing. As the officers left, I couldn't help but grin. Karen had lost the battle, but I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. After the police left, I thought that maybe, just maybe, Karen would finally back off and let it go. She had made a complete fool of herself in front of the entire neighborhood, wasted the police's time, and been told point-blank that she had zero authority over my property. Any normal person would have taken the loss and moved on. But Karen wasn't a normal person. I should have known better than to think this was over. For about a week, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I knew Karen well enough by now to recognize that she wasn't the type to admit defeat so easily. Sure enough, I soon noticed a new wave of HOA nonsense unfolding right in front of me. One day, I came home to find bright orange violation notices plastered all over my gate, my fence, and even my mailbox. The HOA was now claiming that my gate was an unauthorized structure and that I was in violation of some ridiculous aesthetic guidelines. They were trying to find me. I pulled one of the notices off and read through it, shaking my head. The HOA was demanding that I remove the gate immediately or face a fine of $100 per day until it was gone. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. They had already been told by the police that they had no jurisdiction over my land, and now they were doubling down? I decided I wasn't going to waste time arguing with Karen directly. Instead, I took all the notices, stuffed them into an envelope, and mailed them right back to the HOA's office along with a copy of my property deed. I even included a polite note. "Dear HOA, I do not live under HOA regulations. You have no legal authority over my property. Any further attempts to fine me will be considered harassment and will be addressed accordingly. Best regards, the owner of the property you keep trying to steal." I sent it off and figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. Karen takes it to the city. A few days later, I received a formal letter from the city. I immediately knew who was behind it. According to the letter, there had been a formal complaint filed regarding my gate, claiming that it was obstructing a designated public right-of-way. The city was now requiring me to attend a hearing to determine whether my property was, in fact, legally mine, or if the HOA had a case for turning it into a public road. I laughed out loud when I read it. Karen had really outdone herself this time. She wasn't just fighting dirty. She was going all in. I wasn't worried, though. The law was on my side, and Karen had no idea what she was getting herself into. The hearing and Karen's meltdown. The day of the hearing, I walked into City Hall fully prepared. I had every legal document, every survey map, and even copies of the police report from when Karen had falsely called 911 on me. Karen, on the other hand, walked in like she was about to crown herself queen. She was decked out in her finest power outfit, clutching a stack of HOA documents as if they actually meant something. She was smug. That smugness didn't last long. As soon as the hearing began, the city official leading it looked thoroughly unimpressed with Karen's claims. "So let me get this straight," the official said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're claiming that this road has been in use for years and should be designated as a public right-of-way." Karen nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. It's been a vital part of the community. The HOA approved it years ago, and this man is trying to take it away. The official sighed. And did the HOA ever legally acquire this land? Was there any agreement made with the property owners? Karen hesitated just for a second. No, but did the city ever designate this as a public road? Karen shifted uncomfortably. Not officially, but do you have any legally binding documents that override this man's private property rights? Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched with pure satisfaction as the official turned to me. Sir, do you have proof of ownership? I slid my folder across the table, containing everything they needed. Property deeds, survey maps, the whole 9 yards. The official flipped through the documents, nodded, and then leaned back in his chair. Well, this is pretty clear-cut, he said. This land is private property. The HOA has no authority here, and there is no legal basis for turning it into a public road. I almost felt bad for Karen. Almost. She sat there, fuming, her face turning a deeper shade of red with every passing second. This is ridiculous, she finally exploded, slamming her hands on the table. This is a community issue. You're just going to let one man decide what happens to an entire neighborhood. The official did not care. Ma'am, he said, rubbing his temples, this is private property. The matter is closed. Karen's consequences. Karen stormed out of the hearing in a fit of rage, but she wasn't done. She tried one last pathetic move, an online smear campaign. She went on the neighborhood Facebook page and unleashed hell, calling me a selfish dictator and ranting about how I had ruined the community by blocking off their road. She even tried to rally the HOA into boycotting me, but that backfired spectacularly. See, a lot of people in the neighborhood weren't actually on Karen's side. They had tolerated her nonsense for years, but now that she had gone full psycho over a road that wasn't hers to begin with, people started calling her out. The comments were brutal. Karen, this isn't your land. You lost. Move on. Wait, you actually called the police over this. LMAO, did you seriously waste taxpayer money trying to steal this guy's property? Unbelievable. And then the real kicker, one of the HOA board members, someone Karen thought was on her side, finally had enough. They publicly announced her removal from the HOA board. That's right. Karen was kicked out of the HOA. Turns out her power-hungry antics had been causing problems for years, and this was the final straw. The board voted her out, and without her little title, she had no more leverage. She tried to fight it, of course, but no one wanted to hear it anymore. The aftermath. With Karen out of power, the HOA finally dropped the issue. The road remained blocked off. My gate stayed up. And Karen, she moved. That's right. She sold her house and left. Apparently, being publicly humiliated was too much for her ego to handle. As for me, I still live here. My property is mine, and no one dares to trespass on it anymore. And every time I walk past my perfectly intact gate, I smile. Because at the end of the day, I won. And Karen, she lost everything.